Hello and welcome to this free CPD webinar on the new government guidance for protective security and preparedness for education settings. My name's Lewis Donald, I'm the Principal Safeguarding Partner at EduShield, and in this webinar I want to talk to you a little bit about this guidance and give you a feel for how it applies to your setting. This guidance, in my mind, is the first piece of guidance, and it really is there to start the conversation around security preparedness within school settings as we approach into the era of Martin's Law. Now, in terms of the document itself, its context is quite interesting. It is published as non-statutory guidance, first released in April of 2025, and it's there ultimately, it says, to help education settings prepare for and respond to terrorism or other major events using simple, low-cost measures. It applies to all education settings, and it's very much based on the NACTSO principles, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. The online version has some really useful and specific risk assessment and other templates to help you plan, create or review these security arrangements within your setting. There are some really key actions in there for schools to start thinking about, particularly around appointments of a security lead, creating inclusivity approaches for lockdowns and in evacuations. It also has tips in there around what you should include in grab bags and what tools and knowledge your staff need to make sure that they can prepare for when the worst case scenario becomes reality. The guidance is shaped around 3 pillars of readiness. The pillars ultimately are there to give you a feel for why it matters and who does what the roles are of specific people within your setting. It talks secondly about threat awareness and immediate response protocols, what you do when that worst case scenario does happen in your setting. And thirdly, it's around planning, preparing, practicing and exercising the plans that exist or that you're starting to develop within your school setting. Think of it almost like a stool. It approaches it by saying if you was to remove one of those pillars, the whole thing falls down. Ultimately, this guidance is there to tell you who does what you need to do when something goes wrong, and how you exercise and plan for that event. So let's focus first then on staff roles and what different roles and responsibility colleagues take on in such a scenario. The guidance tells us that teachers and head teachers, and where delegated their deputies, have a contractual duty to promote the safety and well-being of learners and staff. We know that's basic safeguarding. Therefore, it tells us in there that teachers and head teachers have a real responsibility to spot unusual or suspicious activity and report it in the usual channels. The guidance also introduces a new role of the security lead, a person designated within your school that has the authority, access to the resources, and has the knowledge and space and time to be able to coordinate and oversee protective security and preparedness in your school. And that means ensuring policies are in place, training plans are properly developed and exercised, and that staff understand the role they play in a crisis. They're also there to act as the main point of contact for staff, emergency services, the community, and other multi-agency partners when leading or responding to an incident. Secondly, it talks about incident leads. Now, this role is designed by the guidance to be the person that takes charge during an incident, making fast, clear decisions to keep pupils and other stakeholders safe, coordinating with police to manage communications, address safety measures, and oversee resources and well-being for all. The police have a really interesting approach to this, as do the other blue light responders, which is the gold, silver, bronze command structure. At EduShield, this is what we teach senior leadership teams and executive teams, because it's really important to recognise that ultimately in a crisis like this, it is important that senior strategic leaders remain in that strategic sphere, whilst tactical leaders such as your head teacher are given that space to be able to command and control that incident on the ground, with your bronze staff being able to lead those individual tasks such as perimeter security, first aid, safeguarding, communications and so on. This guidance starts to give us a feel for where these different roles such as security lead and incident lead fits into this command structure. But it is important that as you start to prepare for a major or a critical event in your school, that you have a clear understanding of the roles that different colleagues play in such an event. So why does this guidance matter, and who does it matter to? Well, ultimately, it's everyone's responsibility. We've seen over recent times how there's been an increase in the amount of intruders on school sites, protesters or protests that happen in and around the school community, and the impact that can have on school grounds. And also localised or community police and emergency incidents that can spill over into the school setting. This guidance is there to offer you a framework to understand the role that staff play, how to develop a security culture, and to give you the tools you need to start to think about the command and control function that your leadership team plays in a major or a critical incident. So let's have a look at some of those roles in a bit more detail. The guidance tells us really clearly that all staff must participate in training and awareness programs related to protective security and preparedness measures. They need to be vigilant and report unusual activity or suspicious ongoings. All staff have a role in supporting the security lead in implementing and maintaining the protective security and preparedness plan, your major and critical incident policy. And on the note of that policy, staff need to have read it, understand it, and be able to exercise it in the event of a crisis. All staff as well, of course, have a duty to ensure that they protect vulnerable children, for example, those with SEND, who may need additional support in a crisis too. But all of that only works when you have a really effective security culture within your school. So let's take a look at 3 top tips around embedding that security culture of awareness, vigilance, and safe behaviours. The first thing to say that culture and security culture goes beyond physical measures. Security culture isn't just about fences, CCTV, etc. It builds on the existing safeguarding plans and risk management practices that exist within your school to establish an environment where security awareness is woven into everyday routines. It's about security-minded communications, ensuring that staff recognise that they need to be mindful when it comes to sharing information publicly, be that in a local social event or online. Where communication is necessary, the guidance reminds us that communication channels should be specifically designed and limit the amount of information and detail to only what's absolutely necessary. This is going to be really key as we approach the implementation of Martin's Law, where there'll be statutory duties on schools and other settings to ensure that there are extra protective measures put in place around signing up for events such as Sports Day or Parents' Evening. And then finally, proactive vigilance, the SCAN protocol, encouraging staff to see, check and notify. We'll touch on the SCAN protocol in a bit more detail because it's really important that staff understand and really embed this into their day-to-day practice of vigilance. SCAN stands for see, check, notify. C, stay alert to anything unusual, any behaviours, vehicles, packages, or persons and situations that feel out of place. Check, if safe, engage or disrupt suspicious activity, using the power of hello, asking the question to start a conversation or gauge intent. With that in mind, though, it's important that leaders ensure that staff are safe when they're doing this, that there are plans and processes and procedures in place to support staff who, with the best will and the good intention, wish to challenge unusual activity, maybe at the school game. And the most important one in there is notify, reporting concerns immediately to your security lead or incident response process, telling somebody what you've seen and why it feels unusual. Everyone in the setting plays a part. It's like safeguarding, it's about vigilance, early intervention and rapid communications. So let's turn to the second pier, which is around threat awareness and immediate response protocols. The guidance tells us it's important that we identify threats and spot unusual behaviours, items or situations early to prevent escalation. It tells us that we need to respond safely, using the stay safe principles of run, hide and tell, and see, check and report. It's important that in the event of an emergency, staff take clear, proportionate action, such as locking down the school, activating an evacuation or evacuation in line with the school's established policies. Communicating effectively, sharing accurate information quickly with staff, emergency services, and those affected. That's the role of your senior leadership teams, your executive teams, and your security leads in that instant. And it's also where that gold, silver, bronze structure comes into its own, because everybody knows their role that they play in responding, reacting, communicating, and ultimately recovering. So let's think then about identifying threats. How do we inform staff and get to a position where that security culture ensures that staff are alert and proactive? We can use a number of different approaches for this. The SCAN protocol that we just mentioned, the HOT protocol, run, hide, tell, and lockdown and response. We've spoken about the SCAN protocol, but let's have a look at the HOT protocol, which is for the event where a school receives a bomb threat. For the purposes of the guidance, a bomb threat is defined as where an individual places an article or communicates within the intention of inducing a person to believe that something is likely to explode or ignite, causing harm within an education setting. A bomb threat can be communicated in a number of different ways, be that a phone call, a recorded message, possibly using AI through a sort of text-to-speech function, communicated in written form, face-to-face, delivered by social media, or via an independent third party, i.e. a person or an organisation unrelated to the intended victim. All bomb threats and communications that may feel like a bomb threat are a crime and must be reported to the police by dialing 999, no matter how ridiculous or implausible the threat may seem. So in terms of the HOT protocol itself then, this is used for when evaluating unattended or unknown items. It helps you determine whether action is needed. Firstly, H, hidden. Could the item have been deliberately concealed or placed out of view? O, is it obviously suspicious? Does the item sell telltale signs of being a bomb or an explosive device? Has it got wiring, tape, batteries? Does it appear out of context or resemble something you'd expect someone to intentionally leave behind? And T, typical. Is this item consistent with what belongs in the location? For example, maintenance tools near a building yard, or does it look completely out of place in the setting? If the answer is yes to hidden or obviously suspicious and no to typical, then we have to follow the 4 C's: confirm, clear, control, and communicate. And that's laid out clearly in the guidance. We confirm there's a threat, we communicate with 999, we clear the area and make that area safe, and then we implement our command and control functions as a setting. Secondly, the guidance talks about a piece of guidance that's more well known, which is run, hide, and tell. And it's important that staff understand the role they play in a marauding terrorist attack. A marauding terrorist attack, or an active shooter, is where a person deliberately enters an education setting or any public space with the intention of causing harm to as many people as possible, and the approach is weapon enabled, be that with a firearm or with some type of bladed article. The run, hide, tell principle is really simple, but let's just watch this short video to remind ourselves about it.
I've climbed to the summit of Everest.
I've tackled some big units. I've brought down the All Blacks.
I've trained in Taekwondo for 16 years.
I've been in the Paras, the Royal Marines and the Special Forces.
I've started from the bottom and fought my way to the top.
Do you know what I'd do in a knife or gun terror attack?
I'd run,
Hide.
Tell.
Right now, terrorism is a real threat.
and even though attacks are rare,
There are things you can do to stay safe.
Remember,
Run,
Hide.
Tell.
Sometimes a lockdown is necessary, and it's used when there's a direct or an immediate threat to people inside your setting, such as an armed intruder or a violent incident nearby. It could also include a dangerous animal on site. Its aim is to keep everyone safe by securing them in place until the danger has passed or the emergency services have given the all clear. There's 2 types of lockdown covered in this guidance. Firstly, evacuation, moving people from outside areas into safe, secure locations within the building. This may be used when the threat is outside but not yet inside, e.g. a dangerous individual nearby or an environmental hazard. The guidance tells us to ensure that all access points are locked, blinds are closed, and everyone is accounted for. It's your policies and procedures that are going to operate as the framework here to ensure that that lockdown is safe and effective. The second approach to a lockdown is evacuation. An evacuation is used when it is safer for people to leave the building or site than remain inside. This could be due to a fire, structural hazard, bomb threat, or other dangers where staying put would increase risk. The aim here is to move everyone quickly, calmly, and safely to a designated assembly point. Decision making in lockdowns is really, really important. Something that we aren't very good at in the education sector is decision logging, capturing our decisions, the information we knew at the time, and why we made those decisions. Part of our work with senior leadership teams and executive teams is to ensure that they have decision logs in place. Trained logists, somebody who can capture what was known in that moment to support the decision making that's been made and ultimately ensure transparency and support with any accountability processes that happen later down the line. But the guidance lays out some quick examples of how you need to think during a lockdown, or particularly when you're considering putting your school into a lockdown. Before a lockdown happens, you need to ensure that everyone knows the lockdown signal and procedure. What does that look like in your school and how well is it communicated with stakeholders? Secondly, during a lockdown, there's some tactical and important measures that are captured in this guidance to help you in a lockdown. And it mentions things like locking doors, closing blinds, keeping people quiet and out of sight, using internal communications to give updates without alerting the threat. What does that look like in your setting? What are the communications tools that you would ultimately utilize? And finally, those additional factors. Plan for those with additional needs and how to secure large spaces. Agree on what the all clear sign will look like. There's a lot in there, but ultimately, to get that right, we have to plan, prepare, and practice. Creating and maintaining incident response plans that are tailored to your school site, that include lockdown, evacuation, but also post-incident recovery. It's important to remember, especially as a strategic leader, that your recovery starts at that first 909 call. Your ultimate strategic priority, aside from keeping stakeholders, pupils safe and staff safe, etc., is to get that school back into a place of recovery and business as normal, or the new normal. Prepare, ensuring that all staff are trained on those plans, they understand the role they play, and have access to the resources and equipment they may need. And practicing. It's all well and good having policies in place, but how well are you practicing these drills, exercising your policy, ensuring that your senior leadership teams understand the roles they play in a crisis, and then learning from those exercises, refining them, capturing lessons learned, and ultimately implementing them. So we've spoken a lot about major incident plans and policies here, and the guidance gives us some broad tips around how we might think about developing them. The first thing, of course, that we need to do is understand the risks associated with our school site and the community context. It's about identifying the most likely and highest impact threats to your setting, considering both internal and external risks. Have you considered your prevent risk assessment a statutory duty within the prevent duty itself? Secondly, understanding the roles and responsibilities and capturing that within your plan. Defining who's going to lead, support, and deputise during an incident, ensuring that you have cover for absences. Who in your MAT or local authority or school will take on the role of that gold strategic commander for the incident. Ensuring that your policy captures incident procedures. It documents clear step-by-step actions for lockdown, evacuation, and post-incident recovery. How are they going to be shared and understood by all stakeholders? And coordinating proactively with partners. Every school in the country is in a region that has a local resilience forum. The local resilience forum is a forum of multi-agency partners that test and practice multi-agency major incident plans monthly. When was the last time you engaged with them to get the latest insight on how emergency services would respond to an incident in your school? But in your plan, it should capture how you intend to interoperably work with emergency services, multi-agency partners, and so on. Do you know how to involve yourself in the multi-agency gold group in such an emergency? Let's turn to preparedness then. We've spoken there about our plans, but as plans turn into written plans and then plans that are lived out within your school setting, staff need to be trained on what it is that their role is in a crisis. And that means regular staff training, developing that CPD approach in the same way we do with safeguarding, making emergency preparedness not a bolt-on to safeguarding, but part of your safeguarding culture. Making sure that there's access to essential emergency equipment in your school, drilling your plans with your leadership teams, and ensuring that you know who will need support in such a scenario, and making sure that those that need that additional support or inclusive approach aren't left to wonder what they need to do when the worst happens. We've spoken there about preparing and access to emergency tools, and one of the most important emergency tools that a school can have is its grab bag, and the guidance talks about this by giving us some examples of what a grab bag might include. A grab bag is something that you would literally grab from reception or from your designated locations around the school to help you as the incident lead command and control that situation. It should include things like first aid kits and medical supplies, in particular any emergency medication that's required by pupils, high visibility vests and torch, up-to-date contact lists and site plans, so you can quickly contact the people you need and you know exactly and can pinpoint on maps where people are in the building when working with emergency services. Basic communication devices, whistles, two-way radios, loudspeakers, spare phone chargers, the tools you need to be able to ensure that you can communicate effectively in a crisis. In terms of the guidance itself, on pages 37 to 38, it does give us a lot more information around what can be included in your grab bags, and I'd encourage you to have a read through and start thinking about what that looks like contextually for you in your setting. We've spoken a lot as well about practicing drills and exercises. In our sector, we're really good at fire drills. We're really good at lockdown drills, but how good are we at sitting down as a leadership team and playing out a tabletop exercise? One of the things that we do on our course is to run an AI-based interactive exercise where leaders are put through their pasted with real-time injects that give them those questions that they might receive from government ministers, from the local and national and international media, but also from parents and unions and other stakeholders as well. You should drill your emergency plans to a point where staff know and understand the roles that they play in a crisis. Practicing isn't just lockdown drills, it's tabletop exercising as well. Now, just a note on planning lockdown drills, and this is covered very much in the guidance as well, it's important that we take it as almost a staged approach throughout the year. It's kind of like how we do with fire drills. Stage 1 of your lockdown drill isn't just ringing the bell and doing the drill, it's about raising awareness with pupils so that they act confidently and behave in a way that you would want them to ultimately keep them safe. Raising awareness on your school campus to inform and educate pupils around counter-terrorism preparedness, British values, and understanding how they can keep themselves safe in a crisis. Stage 2 is that first lockdown drill. You're providing warning that it's going to happen so that people don't panic and they understand and they can process it and understand it, and to a point where it becomes a learnt, a muscle memory type response. Stage 3 is that second lockdown drill. This drill should have less detailed warning, with the expectations of pupils tested. But it is important that where we do these drills, we recognise who our vulnerable children are, and if necessary, apply a differentiated approach to ensure that they get the same learning and experience, but in a way that works for them. And then stage 4, towards the end of the year, is where you do a surprise lockdown drill with no warning, with the exception, of course, of your vulnerable students or students who may have experienced some type of post-traumatic stress. The guidance is really clear, and rightly so, that we think everyone. Our drills shouldn't exclude learners with SEND, and you should build your drills with inclusivity and accessibility in mind. That said, the guidance is clear that when you're planning these drills, you do need to assess on a case-by-case basis how vulnerable learners and learners with SEN may react or may need additional support to help them understand what it is that's happening and play a role as part of that drill. So the final thing in terms of preparedness then, as I say, is actually building on that concept of tabletop interactive exercises. These are a great tool to help you learn in an invaluable way as a senior leadership team to come together to really rehearse your response to a major or a critical incident. These exercises typically involve a series of scenario-based injects. You can do this by simply mapping out a storyboard of an incident and creating pieces of paper with different bits of information on, such as, for example, the fire alarm's gone off, or the media have now been in touch, or parents have turned up at the gate. Different scenarios that you can then inject to your senior leadership team to work through as a team to understand how it is that you would respond. So with all this in mind, what do you need to do next? Embedding a strong security culture isn't something you can just do overnight. It involves promoting vigilance and reporting, modelling security-minded communications, and ensuring awareness is woven into daily safeguarding practice. Appoint and empower a security leader within your school. Review and strengthen your incident plans. Train and rehearse with all of your staff. That ultimately leaves you in a position that ensures that you are well versed in your plans, it's well practiced, everyone knows their role in a crisis, and when the crisis does happen, you're in a place to respond rapidly. At EduShield, I'm really passionate about supporting leadership and executive teams around major incident preparedness. I do think it is something that across our sector we need to get better at. And part of our work is working with those leadership teams and executive teams to help you develop the frameworks that you will use in a crisis, help you understand the role of gold, silver and bronze leaders in a crisis to ensure that when the worst case scenario does become reality, you have a tried and tested procedure in place that's been regularly drilled so you can act in the best interest of children and ultimately keep them safe. To find out more about our major incident preparedness work with senior leadership teams and executive teams, please do reach out to us at edushield.org.uk or contact me, Lewis Donald, on LinkedIn. I hope you found this a insightful webinar that's given you a bit of an insight into this new piece of guidance and really I do hope that it starts a conversation around security preparedness within your setting and ultimately helps you prepare not just for the implementation of Martin's Law, but also helps you prepare for when the worst case scenario becomes reality.